It is the most shallow way to look at this, and it is just ridiculous.
Welcome to Racking Our Brains. I'm Paul.
And I'm Abdul. And today we're discussing something that we've been thinking about, and I hope you'll think about it too.
I'm most excited to learn how other people feel about topics I'm passionate about.
We know you have something to share, so leave a comment below.
Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you get our newest discussion.
So Shannon Q is a host on The Atheist Experience.
This is a call-in show.
Okay. And it's a YouTube short, so you're immediately taken to her response. You don't get to see what the person on the line actually said. But she's responding and saying,
like, from a clinical perspective, like, if you study the field at all, you are objectively incorrect. It is not a mental illness. You could classify it as some sort of crowd conformity. You could classify it as some sort of indoctrination. There's myriad other ways that you could look at the phenomenon of religiosity. None of them fit whatsoever into the paradigm of what anybody who is worth their salt as a clinician would classify as mental illness.
Religion would, by no definition in the psychology community, in psychology academia specifically, and professionally, would define as a mental illness. So I'm assuming that the person on the phone tried to claim it was. And very famously, Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The God Delusion, where he either directly or just for, with poetic license, tried to describe religion as a delusion. So that's where we are. She's saying absolutely not. What was your reaction to her saying that?
Well, to be honest, my first reaction is, hey, let me get on the phone with Abdul and to get your ideas on, what is it, the DSM?
Mm-hmm. The DSM-4.
Right. So
the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual, I think it's called.
Right. So that's the quote unquote Bible, intended. The Bible of the psychology community as it pertains to what they call a psychosis, what they call abnormal or unhealthy behavior. Delusion. Is delusion a diagnosis?
I would say no. And by the way, for the audience, I'm not a professional. I'm not a practicing psychologist or anything. I would say no. I would say delusion is probably a symptom of multiple different diagnoses. And we should acknowledge that this is a living, breathing document, right? Or this is presumably because it's the fourth version of the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual. But it exists to describe different illnesses, personality disorders, etc. And I believe things have come and gone from it, right? So we used to call things...
I believe 100%.
Right? So we used to call things like multiple personality disorder. I think it's called dissociative identity disorder. And the diagnoses in existence of a lot of these different things wax and wane, right? Like, so you have periods in human history where we said, yeah, everyone's got this, or not everyone, that's an exaggeration. But, a group of people who are exhibiting a certain behavior or certain set of behaviors has this, we classify them as this, and then that changes. And that maybe takes some of the people out of that group. So yeah, I have to agree with what she said, but again, I did that lead in to say, like, you could easily just write it in, right? Like, there could be some point in our future where we do say, put that in the book, put that in the DSM-4 or 5 or 6 or whatever, and say, yeah, anyone who says they believe in something, a supernatural power that created all of existence, is classified as having this disorder. But today, yeah, I guess not. You couldn't say that it's any one thing. The other thing for me is that, when I read The God Delusion, it was, again, poetically powerful to be like, oh, wow, you're deluded in the way someone who is mentally ill can be deluded or can hallucinate, right? Can believe something without evidence, can truly experience something in their own minds that doesn't exist for the rest of reality, for the rest of the people that are in their shared reality. But yeah, thinking about it deeply now, especially after that clip, I don't know that I could say that. I don't know that I could say that with any with any real way to back it up as a defined mental illness or disorder.
Right, but is it are you technically delusional if you think that God cares about who you have sex with? And you can't be right. So the definition of delusion is a persistent belief that has no evidence and will be protected against evidence, right? Like it's like you actively are protecting this belief against any all contrary information. Like you almost refusing to believe something else because it's important for you to believe this thing, even though it in and of itself has no evidence of factual.
The difficulty is that we can't prove it one way or the other, right?
We can't prove whether something is delusion, whether someone is delusional.
You can't prove that God exists one way or the other. You can't prove that he exists. You can't prove that he doesn't exist.
Right. I didn't talk about the existence of a God or not. I'm talking about the belief of what a God is capable of. That's what I just said, right? Whether or not a God, and I chose one thing, who you have sex with, right? God in the Bible says, don't have sex with someone who has the same genitalia. God also says, do not work on the Sabbath, right? I have these beliefs about this thing that tell me how to feel about real world stuff, right? Homosexuality is a real world stuff. Working on the Sabbath is a real world stuff. Eating meat the Friday before Easter or the Friday before Lent or whatever the fuck. Like all of that, they're beliefs that people hold, right? And they're saying, well, no, I believe this because God told me. Okay, cool. And it's without evidence, right? Like whether God exists or not, do you have evidence of it is the question. That's the delusional part. Is that
But again, as part of the definition, like you said, we would have evidence to the contrary, and that's the difficult part. It's belief of something in the face of evidence of the contrary, and we don't have evidence of the contrary. So, for instance, it's like saying, man, this is really fucking tough.
You don't have evidence of the contrary? What are you saying, sir? You can't prove a negative, right? So we do have evidence of the contrary because we have no evidence of a God telling us not, because God is not just telling Steve that's a hypothetical person. There's nobody named Steve. But God is not telling this random person, just this random person, that they shouldn't have sex with someone with the same genitalia. This person is telling everybody that God wants everybody to not have sex, right? So this is not a personal thing that you only do in the comfort of your home. This is something that you believe for reality that also impacts other people. I think that's what changes the dynamic of, you're right. I mean, I can't prove that if when people say God has a plan for me and they say that plan is to become a shoe salesman with a tall redhead as a wife and 2 kids, one named Bud and one named, what was that name? Kelly. Hey, that's awesome. Good luck with that. But when you say that, no, he says that you can't mix linens or materials when you have an outfit, right? You can't have a silk shirt with polyester pants, or you can't do this and that. And they try to then instill that into the society at large. This goes back to to our conversation about, like, how are we going to allow society to function if we can't have honest conversations about what we're going to accept as real and imaginary, reasonable and unreasonable? Your personal shit, which we understand and are going to be sympathetic to, but we'll be sympathetic to it while you're in your space. You cannot then bring it into the public sphere and then allow it to run amok or do what it wants to do because that's how you fucking feel. No, sir. Or no, ma'am.
I agree. I'm still stuck on why I would feel it's not a delusion. The easiest way to, so evidence to the contrary would be like, I can prove to you there is no God. And then it doesn't matter what you think that God inspired anyone to write in a book and have those specific instructions or laws to follow, as you were posing as the hypothetical? Because if he doesn't exist, then none of that other stuff is true.
Right, but wait, I'm sorry, Abdul. And I'm going to say something, I'm just going to give you all the space you want, but we've had this conversation a million times, and I think I know we both agree on this. You can't prove a negative, right? So there's no such thing as proving that there is no God. We can only prove that the God that you're referring to, the descriptions are self-contradictory. Not that God doesn't exist. Your description of God is self-contradictory. That is my only point. Like, you keep saying that we can't prove that there is no God, and I don't know what your point is in saying that, because that is it's not a tautology, but
No. Again, it's to the definition of delusion, where if it could be proven that there is no God, and I accept your proposal that we can't prove a negative, but if you could, right, and someone still said, I believe there's a God, that would be a delusion. That would be, in the face of evidence to the contrary, I still have this belief.
Okay, so I apologize. I should have done this before already, excuse me. But let's just pull up what we're going to call, let's go, National Institute of Health, Delusions Epistemology. Says Sass and Byram, I'm assuming they are clinicians, consider the phenomenology of delusion and its fit with contemporary accounts from cognitive neuroscience. Starting with their considerations, I'll highlight some basic problems of the epistemology of the DSM. This is the third one, not the fourth one. Actually, there may be a DSM-5 already.
Look at that.
Delusions were defined as false beliefs due to incorrect inference about external reality. I'm going to read that one more time. Defined as false beliefs due to incorrect inference about external reality. The DSM-5 definition is more laconic. I'm going to assume that means layperson based, but fixed beliefs. Now, so the first one was not my understanding. The second one is more in line with my understanding. Fixed beliefs that are not amenable to change in light of conflicting evidence. So conflicting evidence, not particularly. So conflicting evidence and evidence to the contrary are pretty much the same thing, right?
I would say so.
Right, but we don't have to prove that you're wrong. We just have to prove that there's a ton of evidence that would suggest that you're wrong. But also, I think what's missing here is that there needs to also be a lack of what we're going to call reasonable evidence to support your situation.
That's what I disagree with.
Wait, I'm sorry. You disagree with what I just said, or you disagree with?
Yeah. Look, in the way of, is it okay to believe what you believe with the lack of evidence you have? I totally agree with you, right? The lack of evidence there is important to me. So how can you believe that? But in the definition of delusion, again, the lack of evidence for what you believe is not important. It's the fact that we would have evidence literally to the contrary, something that says you are actually wrong. I believe that thing is red. And everyone in the world can understand, taking apart the fact or removing the fact that people can perceive color differently. There's generally an accepted color perception. And if everyone in the world can agree that that thing is blue, and they see it and they say, I've confirmed that that thing is blue, and you still say, I believe that that thing is red, that is a delusion because we have evidence to the contrary.
Right. So, okay, I hate to be a jerk or pedantic, whatever you want to call it, but I just think it's a bad example, right? Because we can get really bogged down into perception and just the fact that red is just the definition of popularity, right? We were just agreeing that that's what we're going to call what most people are seeing, which is the reflection.
I mean, you can. That's fine. That's fine. You can replace it with
something like gravity, something that's tangible, right?
You can do numbers. You could do numbers. Would you agree that most of the world agrees on how to count numbers?
I don't like agreement, though, buddy.
Yeah,
I don't
okay,
like
agree on the
agreement.
mathematical concept of what 2 is
Okay.
versus 4 versus 8.
Right.
Is there enough agreement, like apart from the, as you said, the perception issue with color? Like, would you say that numbers are okay?
I'm only trying to steel man against not you, because I know you and I think alike. I'm trying to steel man against somebody that I think could go down the road, and I will share a Matt Slick interview with you. You don't know who he is. Well, you may have heard of him, but he's an apologist, and it's ridiculous. Let's go with gravity. Let's go with gravity real quick, right? Let's say that we're talking to a guy, a person, and he said, that person says, gravity doesn't exist, right? Like, so we understand gravity to be, what is it, 3.8 meters squared per second?
9.8
9.8 meters per second, right? We're being pulled down, and that's based on
per second squared. Yeah.
per second squared, right? So, which we know, you jump off a building or you jump out of an airplane, if you're away from the thing that's holding you down, which is the earth, it is going to pull you down if there's nothing stopping you from being pulled down, i.e. thrust, i.e. lift, i.e. buoyancy, whatever. And so a person says, nope, gravity doesn't exist. That, I think, is a perfect example of you are delusional. And the way we can prove that you're delusional is I would then ask you to jump off of that building.
No, because they would agree that things fall. This is a worse example, in my opinion. They would agree that things fall. They've said, flat earthers have literally said that. They just say that's just what happens.
No, right, but that's not a reason, sir. That's not evidence
Let's go back. I don't know what your issue is with the numbers. Color, I understood. I still think color is actually fine. But like, if there is 3 quantity of something over there, and I say I believe there's 2, and the whole world can say, nope, I've checked, it's 3, and you say I don't believe you, it's 2. That's a delusion because we have evidence to the again. I'm only setting up this circumstance where we just say we just have evidence to the contrary. Proving gravity is like it's an entire field, right? Like it's an entire practice in physics, and it has to be demonstrable, right? Like it's way more difficult. I think my hypothetical is there's something very clear in what we can present in terms of evidence, and you believe something else in the face of that evidence. Either way, whichever hypothetical we go, red versus blue, gravity versus not really gravity, or 2 versus 3, that has to be present. And what you were saying about religion and belief and faith was that there's just a lack of evidence, but we're missing that confirmation of 3 or confirmation of gravity or confirmation of blue instead of red. We're missing the evidence to the contrary that would allow us to say they're believing something in the face of that evidence.
No, wait. I'm sorry. That is 100% not true, right? So let's just use the example. So Pat Robertson believes that hurricanes are God's wrath, right? Or people believe that Noah's Ark is something like that. There is evidence to the contrary. There is mountains, literally and figuratively, mountains of evidence to the contrary for Noah's Ark. There's mountains of evidence to the blotting out of the sun for half a day or 4 hours or something like that. Like we know what happens. So when you speak about something that has a basis in reality, i.e., floods, water, air, gravity, all of that, animals living a certain amount of time and people living a certain many of years. If you believe the Bible is inerrant, then the Bible says that many people lived until they were 900 years old. We have evidence to the contrary. That is a delusion. I'm sorry, is that not a delusion?
What is the evidence to the contrary?
Of living 900 years?
Yeah.
That we understand the life of a cell and what it takes to remain rejuvenated or able to sustain itself. Like it literally runs out of quote unquote energy to remain in our body in a way that allows us to function.
Again, playing devil's advocate apologist. You could just say that it just doesn't happen anymore.
Why?
That's a different story. But
No.
our evidence that no one lives to 900 and all our studies on cellular dynamics prove that no one now can live to 900 doesn't mean that it couldn't have happened before. We're getting a little lost, and I don't want to play their advocate because you know, as you said, I don't think they have any good reason to believe what they believe. But I'm interested or I don't even know what. I'm surprised maybe that. So are you saying you would go so far as to say yes, it's absolutely delusion. All instances of religious belief is delusion or mental disorder or mental illness?
I just want to be specific to your statement. You said all instances of religious belief. No, not all instances. Okay. But I would say the vast majority of them. And the vast majority I'm referring to, again, the ones that have a tangible and demonstrative impact on the world that we share with other people. There are people who believe that God talks to them, that God, does things in their lives. Cool, awesome. But okay.
Sorry. So that to me is different. Well, and you know what? No, I'm going to fail my own test there. And this is really just, I'm admitting, this is just sort of, I don't want to call it gut feel, but like a personal opinion. If someone says, I believe in God, I believe what the Bible says, I was raised Christian, Muslim, Jewish, what have you, and they do all the terrible things that you and I pick on, like they cherry pick from their religious doctrines. I'm almost okay with that, and that I wouldn't say is delusional. But yeah, the moment someone goes, yep, he literally showed up and talked to me, I would say that instance is a delusion. And again, I'm admitting to you that
wait. You're 100%. I think. Is this where you're admitting to failing your own test? Because
yes,
how do you?
Yes,
exactly. You can't prove
because I have no proof that you didn't talk to that. Yes, but yeah, I'm admitting okay, personal opinion. Is someone just telling me they're a Christian or they're a Muslim or they're a Jew? I don't know that I put that in mental. I don't look at
No. That's not what we're not talking about. Calling yourself a Christian or calling yourself religion. We're talking about specific beliefs. Like a specific belief is delusional.
Well, but again, remember we framed this up with the Shannon Q video and
right, and I don't know one religious person, and I've spoken to thousands of religious people, and I've listened to thousands of separate other videos and debates and conversations and town halls or whatever we want to call them, where people are saying, "I am a Christian." And they believe the Bible. They believe the Quran. They believe the whatever, the books. They believe the things. I've never met a religious person who doesn't have specific beliefs. Now, there are people who say stuff, this is like deism, right? Deism says, I believe that there is a power out there. I don't know what it's doing. So that person, I'm going to ignore that part of our conversation because it's inconsequential. Right, because you're not making any truth claims about the real world that we both inhabit.
I think I'm also still drawing a line. Go ahead, finish.
No, go ahead.
I think I'm also just drawing a line, even with someone who is a theist, right? Because they can get away with. I'm giving them the benefit in court of they can say, I believe all those. The Noah's Ark thing. It's incredibly gullible to me to believe the flood story. Incredibly naive, right? But that's just what happened in the past. People lived to 900 years and whatever else. David defeated Goliath with a sling. They believe everything, right? But it's still different than someone now telling me, "Yup, this dude floated down from the sky through my roof, showed up in the room, he sat and had a conversation with me, and then he just floated."
How is that different? How is
to
that
me,
different?
It is. I don't know. I think it is.
No, I get it. You said it, but I'm just trying to figure out how.
I think it goes back to our roots in our first few episodes, because And again, this is why I go back to it being framed up with the Shannon Q video where she's saying religion should not be classified as mental illness. I don't think while I believe in the power of things like cognitive behavioral therapy and being able to talk through some mental health issues like anxiety or depression, it's different than someone who is truly psychotic, psychopathic. What's the other big one? Not sociopathic, right? It's different than that, where someone's like, to use a colloquial phrase, really got a screw loose, right? Like they're not all there, like all those phrases. That's totally different than anxiety, depression, where you could kind of talk through therapy. And even though there are medications and people feel the way they feel about whether you pursue a medicated solution or a talk therapy solution, but like someone who's truly, again, colloquially not all there, that's usually got to be to the best we can in modern medicine medicated, where you're on antipsychotic drugs, or right, like otherwise you may literally snap and walk around naked and physically harm yourself or somebody else or whatever else. Like I can't classify mental illness in that ilk. And I think with religion, going back to our roots, so much of it for me is indoctrination. And once someone realizes they've been indoctrinated and they start to do all the things you said, if I look around, does this make sense? Does that thing they said make sense? And they talk themselves out of it. Like mental illness, like that psychopathy, and someone who's truly schizophrenic and their brain is literally like hallucinating. Like there's no talking yourself out of it. There's no waking up one day and going,
right, but you're making that up. You're making that up, Abdul.
Making what up?
What you just said. There's no talking yourself out of hallucination, right? Like you're saying that because let's go back to what you said. You said that the diagnosis of psychopathy or being whatever the things that you said, right? The difference when, it's your brain versus just, and you made a distinction, which I was very interesting, between depression and anxiety and psychosis or psychopathy. And I'm like, what's the difference? Because the DSM is based on your behavior, correct? We're not going around doing chemical tests to figure out what your brain is doing. We're just going off your behavior. So explain to me how specific, dynamic, detailed, and standardized these diagnoses are, other than, all right, so you spit on people, you're a thing. You poop on people, you're a different type of thing. Yeah. That's all we're doing here, is that you have a certain set of behaviors that we're going to call this thing, and these other set of behaviors are different, just as abnormal or abhorrent or whatever, but we're going to call them a different thing. But at no point in time do we say, what's going on with, like, that's not how any other science of the body works, right? When we see a cancer, we don't say, oh, you got a cancer, so cool, you get the cancer of the lung, so we're going to call that lung cancer. But we're going to do the same thing or do something different when you have foot cancer. Like, but the cancer in your foot could come from your lymph nodes that, emanate or originate somewhere else in the pituitary gland or somewhere else, right? That's why we do the fucking test. That's why we do the unraveling of the symptoms to figure out what's really going on in the body. And the problem with psychology in general and mental illness in general is that we care about these people and we want to help them, i.e., like you said, medicate them, but you're just taking away their ability to do the things you don't want them to do. You are not changing or even really understanding why that person hates the sound of ice cream.
Yeah, I don't know enough. I don't know enough about the difference, and I made that distinction because in my mind, with my little understanding, it's very different from someone who cannot control hallucinations. And so I was curious, or again surprised to hear you say
nobody can control hallucinations, right? Nobody can. But the problem is, how many people hallucinate but do not express it? And so that person will never be called crazy, right? All jokes aside, I'm not trying to be insensitive. The person that we saw in that video is not the only person who's ever been raped, right? So she's been raped, and that's how she expressed herself. It's not productive or conducive, but I'm not demonizing her for that. I'm sorry that she feels that way, and she's coping the best way she can, my assumption. But there are millions of women, unfortunately, or people, excuse me, who have been raped who don't act like that. But are still suffering, are still mentally having to deal with how it felt and what they think about it and what triggers them. They just have a better ability to cope internally. But that doesn't mean that they're not experiencing what she's experiencing, which then invalidates to somewhat. It makes it problematic. Again, these diagnoses and these feelings of, okay, this is what post-traumatic stress is. No, this is what it looks like for certain people who exhibit it this way. There are tons of people who go to war who stand next to the dude who committed suicide because all his friends died. All his friends were my friends too. But I didn't commit suicide. That doesn't make me better than him, stronger than him. It just makes me different. But we don't understand what that difference is. So stop pretending, which is a delusion. Stop pretending to understand. Aaron Ross says this all the time. Stop pretending to understand things that you don't understand or that you cannot understand. Unless we really want to sit down and start doing fucking very invasive tests of your brain function, exactly when you have to see something and we know what your brain function is. But you got to look at that candle, which I'm looking at a candle right now. You got to look at that candle 7,000 times first. And after the 7,000th time, we then map what your brain looking at that candle seems to do to you. But you looked at that candle on a Wednesday when it was hot, not on a Tuesday when it was cold, or when you were hungry, or when you were horny, or whatever. Like, it's so the dynamics of human interaction and human thought and human behavior is so ridiculously complex. I have very little, I'm just going to be real honest right now in a very open space. I just have very little genuine respect for the specificity and utility from a diagnostic standpoint, right? I get it. We figured out that if we lower your dopamine or raise your serotonin or norepinephrine, if we fuck with these buttons, we push enough of these buttons in the right direction, you can't hurt anybody or you can't feel your pain anymore. But that doesn't mean we understand everybody who is experiencing that thing. But I'll stop. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. And that's, again, part of why I'm surprised to hear you defend classifying religion as a mental illness, because I think I don't know if you've gone on record on the show, but I feel like we've talked about it and you've said, like, what is a mental illness? And kind of what you alluded to there, like, you feel that it is, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Would you say pseudoscience? Would you say, you said
No,
not
yeah.
like other sciences.
Right. I definitely wouldn't call it a pseudoscience because they're trying and they are definitely trying to follow the rigor, for lack of a better word, around, testing, experimentation, being fair in their trials and however they attack it. But unfortunately, because humanity doesn't allow us to, treat each other like rats or rabbits or whatever else they use to understand drugs and understand behavior, we can't do it. We just can't. We can't unravel the human brain and the human psyche the way we do it with rats, where we present them with food. And forget about the more invasive ones. Like we put monkeys in cages, and that's how we found out that monkeys and dolphins, like, we're able to test them and invade their personal space, where we can't do that with humans. So I definitely don't think it's a pseudoscience. I think that they're trying to be as scientific as possible, but I think at the end of the day, they're like, yo, we gotta do something, because fuck me, people are out here hurting each other or themselves. And so they just skip to the end where, how do we stop these people from hurting themselves or each other? And I get it. There's a space for that, but just don't call it an understanding of the human brain. Don't call it the understanding. Don't call it. So to respond to your question about why I think religious beliefs are a mental illness. So just my idea of a mental illness is that something that your mind, because your mind controls you and your behaviors, something that your mind does that is, I don't even know if it has to be unhealthy, to be totally honest. Like, it could just be erratically irrational and illogical to think and to hold as a belief, right? The inability to suspend belief, and when I say belief, to accept something as true, right? The inability to suspend accepting something as true until you have what I think most people would call reasonable, logical reasons to accept it as true. Which means we can have a space where we disagree on things. It's just that we both don't definitively, like you and I hope it's okay to say this, neither one of us will definitively say, of course there's no God. That's stupid. I don't think we'll either say that. But both of us operate as if there's no God and are comfortable saying that the specific ones that have been presented based on the characteristics described are nonsensical and conflict with the evidence that we do have about our shared reality. And I think a big part of what most people would call mental illness is an inability to operate in the shared reality in a healthy way for themselves and for others. So either you're healthy and you're comfortable making other people unhealthy, unhappy, oppressed, whatever, or you're not healthy and you hurt yourself, but you don't hurt other people. But I don't want to relegate it to just whether you hurt yourself or other people, because I still think you can have a mental illness without hurting yourself or other people. I think a mental, because I guess, and this is probably very subjective, I'm saying that a mental illness is one where you're not using your brain the way Paul thinks brains should be used, i.e., to interact with our environment in such a way to protect ourselves and to find happiness, find safety, find food and shelter, like, the necessities, and also interact in a healthy manner with your environment. If somebody is out there just, this is a mental illness. No. Yeah, I mean, it gets dicey, because I was about to say something about like somebody who does things that they know will lead, like, I don't know, if we're talking about like cutting down trees and stuff, like we know it takes a long time for trees to grow. So if we're just cutting down trees for paper and toilet paper and cardboard boxes and everything else and blah, 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 and then lo and behold, we know that trees are important for, the oxygen exchange and carbon dioxide, balance and all that other good stuff. And just the ecosystem of the earth and polluting, like, that is sick, right? Like, that's really stupid. Like, you don't want to die, but you're doing something that is going to lead to the degradation of society and humanity. Some people might say that's I'm trying to look for the word. And I don't want to say mental illness, but like,
Yeah, I think that's where I was stuck. Is just, again, knowing our conversations, you take issue with the definition of mental illness to begin with, and I don't know that I would have been able to define it well prior to. I like the way you put it just now. I think larger than just the way Paul thinks a human brain should work. It's really like what society thinks, right? And that has vastly changed over time, as you've said. We've put in disorders, taken out disorders, or whatever, and we've just thought about things in a different way than we have in the past. But there is sort of an agreed upon, whether it's academia or society at large, definition of how a human should function, how a human mind should function, and then mental illness is maybe just something that falls outside of that. Something is off, something is slightly different, and we need to figure out why. Why isn't this person functioning the way we think they should be functioning? I'm totally fine with that. I don't know. I'm getting stuck on there being some sort of official nature of a definition for specific mental illnesses and disorders, and I wouldn't have put religion in there. But as you covered, yeah, you and I both think it doesn't make any sense whatsoever to believe the things that religious people believe. But I guess I just fall short of saying, yeah, you're mentally ill if you do.
Right, and I also don't have the stigma that, I don't know you, but maybe other people have for that phraseology. Because mental illness is not a death sentence, right? It's not even a sentence. It is what I think of your thought process and your ability to navigate the environment. And I think you said it really well. It's like, it's just we have an expectation of mature adults once they reach a certain age and maturity to be able to conduct themselves with a level of compassion, sympathy, respect, consideration. And mental illness usually leads to unhealthy interactions because of your behavior or thoughts, i.e., you don't want people who have sex with the same gender to have the right to get married or be on insurance policies or whatever. Like that is detrimental to. Yeah, I mean, do I have a clear and defined definition for mental illness? No, I think I have a set of circumstances that behaviors and or activities fall into that would allow me to call something mentally unhealthy. But again, I don't think that that's a bad word, right? I'm sure that there were times where I was doing something in my life that was mentally unhealthy. And that's what a mental disorder is, mental unhealthiness. But it doesn't mean it's permanent. And I think that's one of the problems with, certain words, right, being taken out of the vernacular, or, certain words, being deemed oppressive and hateful, when let's just break down what the word means and whether or not it applies to this person in this one circumstance. Just because a stupid person is going to take it and take this comment and run with it doesn't mean that the comment is invalid. And so maybe I don't have the really heinous is the wrong word. I don't have the very negative.
The stigma, as you said.
Huh?
The stigma, I think you said.
Right. Yeah. I just don't have that stigma for that word or that phraseology. Like, I don't look down on mentally ill people other than to understand how intentional, which is a big thing to me, how intentional is your behavior? That's the only thing that really matters. How intentional is your behavior? Can we prove that what you're doing right now is of your full volition? And if we can do that, then you're a piece of shit. If we cannot prove that this shitty behavior that is mean and hurtful and negative for you and others, if it's beyond your control, if we can prove that somehow, I do not know how we would, to be honest. But if we can prove that, I think that's the quote unquote thing.